Welcome to Sound in Our Lives, Part 1. In this part, we're just going to look at the different ways sound affects us, not just physically, but others. And then the second part of this, I'm going to look at some of the healers and medical doctors, people who are studying sound, and how they use it to bring benefit. So, we all are familiar with putting our headphones on and just cocooning ourselves in our favorite songs. It could be Blue Oyster Cult or the Moody Blues, or it could be Bix Beiderbecke Jazz, or it's whatever. And we're all familiar with using sound to sort of block out the world so we can focus and be in our own space. Well, you're in a big, busy urban environment, just walking along, being cool, listening to your music, and suddenly jackhammers and construction's going on here. And not only do you hear it, but your body feels it, and the ground is shaking because they're destroying the concrete near you. And on the road, as you're going by, you've got a police car, a fire truck, and an ambulance, all sirens wailing top pitch. And then a couple people across the street are screaming at each other, and you can hear that. And suddenly, somebody's laying on the horn as somebody, and you've got all this other stuff. And suddenly, you can still try to focus here, but the body is being picked up with all this other stuff. The jackhammer is a very specific, it shows you very specifically that your body is reacting. And I mean, I tried handling a chainsaw years ago when we were trying to cut some of the dead pines on my parents. And I didn't like it because just 30 seconds holding the chainsaw, by the time I gave it back, I was just so shaky because it was just vibrating so strongly. And I said, I'll do anything. I'm not handling the chainsaw. So, sound isn't everything. It's actually more than we think it is. It's the vibrations coming off of the jackhammer. Um, If you're my age, you may remember a TV ad of an opera singer holding a glass up and just singing a tone and the glass shattering, and then the ad says, "Is it live or Memorex?" Well, if you're not my age, you'll see the same exact idea in the Harry Potter movie where Harry and his friends want to get into Gryffindor Commons. The fat lady's holding a glass trying to croak a high pitch to break the glass, and she tries 3 or 4 times, and they're getting upset. She finally breaks it on the stones behind her, and then she hands it and says, "Isn't this cool? Oh, with my voice." Well, sound can do that too. And like I was talking with Dad when I was starting my sound healer training several years ago before Dad died, and he had been in the Army Air Corps back before there was an Air Force. And he was actually telling me he had heard about groups. Basically, I've seen videos. If you have a group of people in perfect step marching, as long as you're on terra firma, that's fine. But the moment you hit a bridge, they say fall out, you walk normally. And as soon as you're on terra firma, because if you don't, apparently, you can set up enough frequency vibrations to cause that bridge to have problems. Um, I mean, look at establishment medicine. I have a very good friend who used to be an ultrasound technician. She's now does chiropractic and other healing things. But, sound is something that we use. The establishment uses it. Um, we can use it, but we don't always think how it affects us. Um, I remember growing up out in the country, 7 miles from town. We were on a rock road. Uh, on a good day, we might have 3 cars go by. I remember being able to see the Milky Way because there wasn't light pollution. And when I would sit on the yard, because I lived out in the country, I couldn't drive when I was younger. My nearest friends were about 10, 12 miles away. We had a two-party phone line, so I couldn't really talk to them a lot because the neighbors were on the phones a lot. And so I spent a lot of time just in the yard staring up at the stars and listening to the silence. I remember what silence sounds like and admittedly, it's not as wonderful as if you'd gone to a park and just got lost in the park. because it was the cornfields of the Midwest. But still, it was silence. It got to the point where I could hear bird cries from a couple miles away because that's how silent it was. A couple years ago, I helped on the estate to clean it up so we could sell it at auction after Dad died. Admittedly, I could still see more stars than I can where I am now, but it wasn't as silent. There was a lot more light pollution. The city was only 3 miles away instead of 10 now. And there's a lot more neighbors, and the property was on industrial strength blacktop. It was highway. So during rush hour in the morning and evening, you have 10 or 15 cars a minute going by. And some of them were going by 50, 70 miles an hour. It was supposed to be 55 miles zone, but I used to drive back to my parents, and there'd be people going 70, 80 miles an hour. And it had a lot more people in the neighborhood. Now, when I was growing up, there was a dog kennel. So, there'd be farm sounds out there. But now, when I was there, a lot of times there'd be more mechanical sounds. I mean, farmers were still farming, but it wasn't as silent. And I at least have seen what silence is like and what it can benefit you with. A lot of people can't even conceive it because they didn't grow up in that environment. I've lived in, really urban parts of Baltimore where it's never silent. You can never tell exactly what you're hearing. 24 hours a day, there's noise, and there's also light. So you just get used to never having a moment of silence unless you sit in a corner and put your music on. And I'm not going to claim to be a great evolutionary biologist, but I suspect that our body needs some silence so that it can recenter. Because in the next video, I'm going to talk about the concept of entrainment that Jonathan Goldman talks about, and some of the things like that. And if you don't ever have a moment of silence, because even in my apartment, I'm in a basement apartment. It's fairly quiet because I don't have anyone across from me. I don't think anybody's on the other side of me. But I can hear outside my window. I can hear air conditionings run. I hear the refrigerator going. My dehumidifier comes on and off when it wants to. Excuse me. So even in the cities, when we try to have a quiet place, we don't always do it. There's people, 3 in the morning, people will go by making noise, or somebody living upstairs will be upset at something and stomp. So, there's always noise in places, and it's not really that good for us unless you know how to cope with it. And hopefully this series is going to help you learn how to realize that, okay, this stuff is messing me up. At least it's keeping me from my potential, if you want to put it that way, if you want to be more positive. So what can I do that is very simple, that clicks with me?